All right, this is the first class in a series of classes for Tennessee Smart Yards. This entire class is going to be focused on putting the right plant in the right spot and in the right place. So we're going to be looking at how we can actually put those in our yards. We're going to see some situations where they may not have been put in the right place in the right spot in the lawn. So as we go through this, you're going to see some good examples of landscapes and you're going to see some poor examples of landscapes. There are 9 foundational principles to the Tennessee Smart Yards, and this entire one is going to be focusing on putting the right plant in the right place. Now, there are other series of videos, and I encourage you to watch all of them. Now, this is the first one, just basically trying to look at putting a good foundation of what plants to put in your lawn, kind of looking at some of those areas that may hold water, some of those areas that may be considered a xeriscape issue that may not really get a whole lot of water to them to begin with. So kind of looking at putting the right plant in the right spot is what we're going to be discussing all about today. And the very first objective that we're going to be working on is determining our family's landscape objectives. So we're going to be looking at things like the entertainment areas, the play areas, if you've got kids, if you've got animals, if you've got pets, trying to pick plants that may actually work out well with them. We're also going to be looking at what type of a level of maintenance you want to actually do, the extent of mowing that you want to do. Are there shrubs that you want to trim and things like that? So we're going to be basically taking this inch by inch as we go through the slides. So we're going to be looking at a bunch of different objectives today. And the first one is we're going to be looking at our family's objectives. So when we determine our family's landscape objectives, are you the kind of person who wants to have parties? Or are you going to be a grilling type person? You want to actually host things? Are you going to have areas in your yard where you want to view wildlife, where you may want to plant some certain plants to draw in birds? You may want to plant plants to draw in hummingbirds, butterflies. A lot of these pollinator plants are becoming really big right now. Do you have pets? Do you have play areas? Some plants are just not going to play well with those. If we have some examples of plants that have a lot of thorns, they're not going to play well with plants and children. So kind of looking at some of those areas. Are you the kind of person who's going to be spending some time composting also? Now, compost usually is not done right outside your back door. It's usually kind of done toward the back of your lawn somewhere, but kind of give some of those areas some thoughts. So it may be kind of the very first step that you need to do is look at your lawn and figure out what you want to actually do with it, and then kind of determine what type of a level of maintenance that you want to actually control. If you're a wildlife person, kind of encouraging some of those plants to grow that are wildlife. If you've got kids, determining some plants that can be kid friendly as we go through this. Looking at some of the next steps, assess the yard site conditions. Look at the light, look at the topography, look at any drainage issues that may have in the lawn. Now, Tennessee is pretty widely varied. I think if you go from the eastern tip of Tennessee all the way to the western tip where Memphis is, you're going to be spanning anywhere from 3 to 3.5 zones. So it's kind of hard to say, here is one set map of plants that are going to do great all over Tennessee. That's kind of hard to say because when we look at Tennessee, we're going to see a 20 or 25-degree difference in the hardiness in some of these plants. So depending on where you're at, you need to kind of look a little bit more extensively about what plants do well for you. But we're going to try to give some guidelines on some general ones that are going to do well in all these zones in Tennessee. Now, some areas are going to be a little bit harsher than others. So West Tennessee is going to be obviously a little bit more warmer than the hills of East Tennessee. When we look at it, the very first characteristic that we need to focus on is, does our yard get sun or shade? Some plants do not like to be in the sun. And even though we may see them on sale somewhere at a box store or a garden center and we bring them home, sometimes we don't think, well, this plant needs shade and I only have sun. So just kind of use what you want to have in your yard as a guidance. So do I have full sun? Well, that's the kind of plants that I need to be shopping for. Important elements, the very first one is determining your sun and shade, and also determining where the sun sets and where the sun rises in relations to your yard. So, for example, the evening sun on the western side of your house is going to be hotter than the morning sun on the eastern side of your house. Also, look at objectionable views and noises on plan. Are you going to have some things that are going to stick out a little bit like a sore thumb? for example, like that gas tank or some maybe some equipment, or if you've got some sheds in the back lawn. So the very first thing that you need to do is you need to determine if it's a full sun, a part sun, or a full shade type plant that you need to be growing in your yard. Also, get your soil tested. And I'm sure that's not a really common thing that people do sometimes. We don't ever think about it. But the soil pH is going to tell us relatively what plants are going to be easy. And it's also going to tell us what we need to do to our lawn to amend it so that we can grow all these varied types of plants, trees, shrubs, flowers. And it's a pretty simple test. University of Tennessee Extension agents all across the state will be glad to help you make sure that you're taking that correctly. Also, look for signs of urban soils. So whenever the builder built the house, if you've got spots around the home where they may have just kind of scraped back the soil from the house, they threw all the brick, they threw all the sheetrock, they threw all the plywood around it, and you're having to try to figure out how you can grow plants in some of these situations. So kind of look around in the lawn, and it's easy to tell sometimes if the lawn goes up close to the house. Look for some of those spots that are just completely dead where nothing is actually growing at all. Identify poorly drained areas. Now this past winter here in Tennessee, we had some days where we were really just soaking, and it was easy to go out in the yard on some of these evenings after the rain and see areas in my lawn where it was just holding water. So I need to kind of have a mental map of where all of those issues are in the lawn and know, hey, this is an area where poorly drained soils could be an issue, whereas a lot of my flowering plants, some of my trees and shrubs that I may want to plant in that area, they may suffer. So some of the plants, the first reason why they don't grow well is they're sitting in water, and roots are just like people. Roots have got to breathe. Check for compacted soils, and that can also happen from the builder's standpoint. So when they're building the house, they're using all sorts of equipment around the house. And whenever they drive their equipment through the lawn or around the home, all they're doing is compacting that soil more and more and more and more. And also that can lead off, depending on the slope, into some runoff issues. So when all the rain hits some of these compacted soils, it basically just runs right off of it onto other areas in your lawn. Also identify steep slopes in the lawn. Look for those drainage patterns. Look for existing erosion or features that could impact your design. And also, there are some existing features that could enhance your design depending on what you're going to do. The next inch is sketch a yard, including your long-term goals, what you want to do with your space, what type of level of maintenance, and also aesthetics of the yard. Now, this can be as simple as just a black and white piece of paper, and if you want to do different colors of where you want to have certain areas. So if you wanted to have, this is where my children are going to play. I'm going to have this as the red area. Where are my field lines at? I think that sometimes we forget about where the drain lines are for our septic tanks, depending on whether you've got a septic tank or whether you've got uh, what other type of plumbing situation that you have, whether you're on a sewer system. Also consider the space, consider the aesthetics, and also the level of maintenance. If you've got a really sharp slope backyard, it's really not something you want to be on a lot of times to actually do some type of a level of maintenance. So kind of draw these areas in your lawn, and it's also good to draw out what you already have in your lawn. If you've got some things that have been there for a number of years and they're doing well, that may be something you want to kind of put some of those in the backyard. So in this example here of this drawing, there's some tulip poplars, there's some red maples or some dogwoods. So it's maybe something that you may want to add a few more if you want to enhance your yard with some more features of some trees or shrubs that are actually doing well already. The next inch is group plants according to their site conditions and their level of maintenance. When we look at this, most people, when they ask for a landscape plants or landscape designs or something like that, they never say, I want a high maintenance landscape. They want a low maintenance landscape. But there is not any zero maintenance landscape. All landscapes are going to have some type of maintenance over time, whether it's mulching, whether it's pulling some type of a weed, whether it's just doing some general maintenance pruning on top of some of these shrubs and trees. So all landscapes have to have some type of a maintenance plan. Multiple conditions can exist on the same site, because we see some areas of the lawn where it could be full bright blazing sun all day, and then you go over 30 feet and it could be full shade the entire day. So evaluate all those places in your lawn. Example, make sure you put all your sun-loving plants in sun-loving areas, and also the water-loving plants in the moist areas. So kind of identify some of those areas in your lawn that may be holding water, that may be full sun, xeriscape, drought tolerant type plants that you need to be growing right there. And also make sure you put your pre-existing trees and shrubs that are already there in the landscape. The next one is remove or avoid using invasive or exotic plants and incorporate native plants in the landscape. Now, Tennessee, we mentioned earlier, we can range in temperatures between 20 and 25 degrees all over the place. From Memphis, which is a little warmer, all the way up to Mountain City up in East Tennessee. But Tennessee is very varied all across the state. And when we look at it, Germantown, which is near Memphis, and Gatlinburg, which is in East Tennessee, they're a little bit differently, and the precipitation can be completely different each year. So kind of look at what's growing best in your area. Also look at your weather data, because Tennessee is so widely varied across the state. It's always good before you go buy plants to kind of have a headset in your mind of these are the plants that I kind of want to focus on today. And also try not to buy a lot of plants that may have issues at the garden center, the nursery, or their box store. Buy healthy plants. I think the first key whenever we're planting plants in the landscape to making these plants last in the landscape is starting off with a healthy stock of plants to begin with. So look under the leaves, look at the roots of the plant, look under the leaves for bugs, look all over it. If they've got some diseases, leave them there. You don't want to bring some of those plants to your house. ID the environmental requirements. If they're sun, shade, if they're a water-loving type plant, if they're xeriscape, they prefer to be dry. Get some of those plants that are easier to obtain. Now, not all garden centers, box stores, nurseries are going to have every plant that you want, so you may have to go hunting for some of these. And also, view the different types of plant characteristics. Generally, most plant tags will have on the tag how big the plant is going to get. If it's going to be 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall, some of them are going to be vining and they need some type of a structure to actually run up on. So make sure you know before you buy the plant how big it's actually going to get. And that may take some research on your part looking at the different websites, because if we just look at cone flowers, for example, cone flowers usually come in 2 to 3 feet tall, but there are some varieties that are shorter, there are some varieties that are taller, so it just kind of depends on the species because there's so many different cone flowers out there now. Remove or avoid using these invasive or exotic plants, because these are the plants that we usually regret planting later on down the road. Most of these, I think, are all illegal to actually buy in Tennessee. For the most part. So like when we talk about privet, I think all privets are actually banned in Tennessee now. Japanese steelgrass is an invasive plant that mostly grows in shade. So if you've got a lot of sun, you may not have an issue with that. Japanese honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle. Sometimes these were plants that were planted by people because they were beautiful at one time, but then we really didn't see the long-term effects of these plants actually taking over some of our native issues. And you may see one example on the side of the interstate. When you're driving down the interstate, you see these white trees blooming in the springtime. That's the Bradford pear. So we're always encouraging people to kind of stay away from Bradford pear also. And this is just a small list of invasive plants that we have in Tennessee. So if you've got any questions about anything, feel free to contact someone and ask them. Here's a list of some native plants that do well in Tennessee. So some of the native plants, such as calycanthus at the bottom, the sweet shrub, beauty bush, cinnamon clethra, oak leaf hydrangea, black-eyed Susan, the purple coneflower, butterfly weed, Joe Pye weeds, yarrows, goldenrods. These are plants that seem to do really great in Tennessee because they're native. So they're kind of used to the varied temperatures. They're kind of used to the varied rainfall amounts that we may get. And they're also used to the lack of rainfall that we may go through. We may go 4, 5, 6 weeks without any rain. And these things really don't bat an eye at something like that. But we wanted to encourage you, and there's just a small list of some of the native plants that you can use in the landscape in Tennessee yards. Preserve existing vegetation, especially trees, during land disturbance activities. So I kind of wanted to mention that. So whenever they go through and they do maintenance around a new home or they're building a new subdivision, some of the trees that are there can be damaged by some of this equipment that's actually coming through. They could go through and accidentally hit part of the base of the tree and chip off part of the bark, which could actually lead to some other issues down the road. But the major problem is whenever they drive their equipment under all of these trees, they're compacting the soil. And like I mentioned earlier, roots are just like people. Roots have got to breathe. If the soil's compacted, those roots are going to have a hard time actually growing. So we'll see trees in subdivisions. They'll live for a couple of years after the subdivision is in, but after a few years, they kind of slowly start declining, and people are trying to save these trees. And it's kind of hard to save some of these trees in subdivisions when the soil is so compacted that the tree really can't grow. It's kind of been boxed in already. To protect some of these trees from damage, identify the location around the drip line, which is theoretically roughly where the roots are. Create a barrier around the tree, and this will protect the trunk of the tree, and this will also protect the area around the tree from compaction. This area includes the soil and roots that lie directly below the outermost branches. Draw a ring just beneath the outermost branches around the entire tree to locate, and also signage will help construction crews that keep basically all of these activities away from these trees. So if you can kind of keep people away from some of these existing trees, you won't have further compaction issue with these trees, and they will hopefully live longer than being trying to grow in compact soil. When we look at our lawn, are you the type of person who enjoys getting out there in the summertime and mowing your lawn? I have friends, I have family members who just love mowing the lawn. Are you the type of person who I hate the lawn? I just want to grow flowers. I want to grow vegetables. I want to have a lawn that just works for me. I don't want a lawn at all. So it depends on what you want to do. So kind of identify what you want for your lawn, whether you're the type of person who wants a large lawn and you want it to look good, you like those racing stripes up and down the lawn, or do you want a landscape that you can walk through and kind of have a little hidden paradise in your private garden? An estimated 25% or more of managed turf grasses experience shade stress. Probably one of the top questions regarding turf grass that we get in extension offices. How can I get grass to grow in shade? It's really not going to grow that great. Most turf grasses really need full sun to actually get growth. They need full sun to actually have the right root growth. So sometimes in those really shady areas under trees, it may be best to kind of put a little hidden garden somewhere in there. We have a lot of great native shade plants that would do well. When I think about especially some of these native ferns that prefer to be in the shade, we can have some good looking gardens under a lot of shade, but sometimes trying to have turf grasses in shade is just not going to be worth it because you're not going to have the right amount of sunlight to begin with. Look at your mowing heights. If you're the person who cuts the lawn too short and you scalp it, what you're going to do is you're going to send some of your turf grasses into stress. Higher turf grasses results in a more extensive root system. So when we scalp the lawn too short, the roots are a lot smaller. So the plants, if we look at these two plants in this picture, we've got one with a really good root system and we have one on the left with a shorter root system. Which one do you think is going to do better during drought stress situations? Well, obviously the one on the right, that's a little bit taller because it's got a deeper root system. Mowing height recommendations can vary by grass species, so I hate to say all grasses should be this height because each species of grass is going to be completely different. So make sure you do some research or talk to one of the extension agents about how tall your centipede grass should be, your fescue, your Bermuda, depending on whatever it is. Feel free to ask somebody. Also, mowing heights can create a more of a drought and pest tolerant system. If we have a really healthy plant, we're going to have better immune system basically for the plant when it comes to some of these diseases and some of these bugs that can plague some of our lawns. Consider native warm season grasses because there's 5 reasons here: aesthetics, the diversity, wildlife habitat, reduced maintenance costs, and also water quality protection. So when we're looking at some of these native warm season grasses, we're seeing a lot more people use these in landscapes. And what's great is a lot of these we have cultivars for. So if you kind of Google some of these different grasses now, like andropogon, some of the broom sedges, the blue stem, the switchgrasses, which is a panicum. We have different cultivars of all of these. Some of them stay shorter, some of them have different leaf colors, some of them will be red, black, blue. It depends. So look at some of these native warm season grasses, and these are some of the toughest ornamental grasses that we see in the landscapes now. And we're seeing a lot more people use these because of their level of maintenance. It's extremely low. When we look at some of the levels where we have maybe a slope somewhat in the landscape, you may want to consider putting some of these down. Depending on the slope, some people may not want to mow it. This would be a great example of some places where we can use some of those native grasses because they, for the most part, are not going to get really tall. They kind of stay in the area. If you've got a lawn, you can actually mow them around or whatever, depending on the situation. So do some research because each of them can get different sizes. When we look at the placing the wrong plants in the wrong spot, we need to look at our level of maintenance. So we see the example on the right. We see the shrub that was placed there, which is the wrong spot, because what's going to happen is it's going to keep growing over onto the area where the steps are, and it's going to be a maintenance problem every few months. So unless you really enjoy cutting back trees and shrubs, look at some of those examples. And also the wrong place, so I think that's, it looks like a little Nandina in the picture on the left. Those are going to get larger also. So just kind of look at putting the right plant in the right spot. Now, not all plant tags are going to be exact, but they're going to give a pretty good estimate of how big a plant's going to get. Also, with placing the wrong plants in the wrong spot, it's going to be the loss of money, time, and also the long-term frustration. So in 10 or 15 years, I'm sure these people on the right really regret placing that evergreen plant right there beside the sidewalk because they are constantly having to cut it. Plant these plants correctly. So whenever you buy it from the store, take it out of the pot, make sure it has good roots before you leave the nursery or the box store. Score it, which means actually go through and cut those roots because you don't want those roots to continue growing around in a circle. Our goal is to kind of break these roots out so that they can actually go right out into the soil that's already there. Loosen the roots before planting because tight roots will not grow out properly. Just take a knife and go through and score the root ball a couple of times. Oh, here's a couple of examples of improper planting. If your trees have some type of a strap, nylon or plastic or metal at the base of them, we have got to pull those away from the trunk because we've seen some long-term effects of these where they left them on, wrapped around the base of the tree. And I've been called on examples also where the tree had the straps left on at the base and they were wondering why the trees had died. So make sure you're planting the right plant in the right spot by placing it in the hole correctly, by removing any type of straps on it. Shallow is always better than deep because sometimes these trees and shrubs that we may be buying from the nurseries or the box stores, they could be planted too deep in the container to begin with. So ideally, we need to dig out to the container to find the root flare. So at the base of the tree, the root flare should be visible. If the tree looks like a giant telephone pole going straight into the ground, the tree is too deep. It needs to actually be pulled, the soil in the pot needs to be pulled back to where we can find the root flare. Also, if they're up a little bit, it kind of gives the area some moisture retention at the base of the ground. So if it holds a lot of water, the base of the soil is still fine. At the top, root ball side covered with mulch, not soil. We want mulch pulled away from it because if we have mulch piled on top of the bark of the tree, mulch over time will start composting. So we're going to be composting our live tree if we leave it in a lot of mulch. as wide as possible on the width of the tree, and also the depth should be less than the height of the root ball. And ideally, like we said earlier, the root flare should be a couple of inches up above the existing soil. And we need to backfill with the existing soil. And I know there's been a lot of discrepancies over the years. Should we mend the soil? Should we do this? Should we do that? We should amend, we should not amend the soil. We should backfill with the existing soil, because if we amend the soil quite a bit, we're going to create a container, and that the roots are not going to want to grow out into the existing soil. They're going to stay right there in the soil that's really healthy, and it's dark and it's beautiful, and they're not going to go out into the soil that we already have. So we're going to have some long-term effects of that. Kind of looking at some of these, you can see in these pictures right here, these trees are planted too deeply because they look like a telephone pole going straight into the ground. We need to see some type of a root flare, which kind of looks like a bell bottom at the base of the tree. Planting steps: when we buy these trees, look for the wires. Dig the shallow hole wide, make sure it's wider. Find the topmost root, place tree in hole, position the top root 1 to 2 inches above the landscape soil, and also make sure the tree is straight. The tree, if it's crooked, it's not going to actually straighten itself out over time. Remove any synthetic materials, cut back the burlap, and leave in the bottom of the hole. Roots will grow out, not down. Add backfill soil and firm the root ball to where it's actually tight into the soil that's already there. Add mulch to cover the root ball sides, and also stake if needed. We see trees staked a lot of times when they don't need to be staked. Staking really should only be done as a last precaution. So if your tree is constantly falling down in some winds, then it should be staked. It shouldn't be staked if it's not falling down on its own. So kind of use your best judgment on that. And the stake should be enough to where the tree can sway in the wind. It should not be tight on the tree. It should be loose. Avoid topping of trees. There's actually a couple of situations wrong with this. Mulch should not be piled around the base of the tree, but we should also not be topping trees. Topping, what it's going to do, it's going to send out a bunch of excessive growth, and all that new growth is going to be a lot weaker than the existing tree that's already there. If you have some type of a landscaper, a tree person come by and they suggest that, please find somebody else. It's not a practice that's good for any tree. So we never would recommend actually topping a tree. A tree should only be planted somewhere where we really shouldn't have to be pruning it to begin with. So always think about, what is this tree going to look like in 40 years? What's it going to look like in 80 years if it's under the power lines or something like that? So just kind of consider where this tree is going to be growing in that amount of time. Also, don't forget that plants grow. We think, I know this picture is a little funny to look at, but all we really think about is they were probably cute little evergreens when they put them around the house to begin with, and after 25 years, they consume the house. And we see this more and more because we see containers of plants at the nurseries or the box stores, and we don't think they're going to grow a lot bigger than what they are in their container, and we try to keep them compact and short. Ideally, if we buy the right plants, they should stay small to begin with, as opposed to buying the huge types of evergreens to place around our house. Also, look up at how you want your house to be look like. And I don't know what's actually on the right side of that. I'm going to assume there are some windows. So if you've got windows in your house, usually windows are used to be seen out. We want to see the outside. We don't want to place plants directly in front of windows because we're going to be blocking that view. Sometimes with newer subdivisions, they have a budget that's supposed to be for plants. So sometimes they will go through because they're required to and throw a bunch of plants in the landscape. And sometimes it's best, if we see landscapes like this, it may just be best for you to pull everything out and just restart again. So kind of look at your landscape. And I'm not sure what all these plants are. I'm sure these are not all low maintenance, type plants. We also forget, we saw that picture a few minutes ago about the evergreens getting really big. The evergreen on the far left, it looks like a blue spruce. Now, blue spruce trees will get huge. That is a terrible spot for it. And I assume that the other evergreen, kind of on the right side, looks like a type of holly. Those can get huge also. So kind of use your best judgment on some of these plants. There are certain cultivars of some of these that will stay smaller. So make sure you're using the right plant in the right spot. Now, this is a pretty good landscape here. It would be good to maybe have some seasonal color in there, so you may consider that. And I kind of like the seasonal color in this landscape also. But kind of looking at it a little bit more, I think that looks like a dogwood in this picture on the left. Dogwoods will get pretty large on their own also, but there are cultivars of dogwoods that stay smaller. Is this the right plant in the right spot? When we look at it, we have some huge evergreens in front of the house, and we have some other types of shrubs in the front, and what they're doing is they're blocking where the front door is. I don't even know how to get into this house. They're also probably blocking number of windows. So when we kind of look at all of these, today we looked at our family's landscape objectives in the lawn. We wanted to figure out where we were going to put our kids area, where our pet area was, where we were going to have a wildlife viewing area. We assessed whether our lawn was full sun, full shade, if we had some areas that held water, if we had some drainage issues in some of them. We drew a sketch out of where we wanted everything in the lawn. We grouped plants according to their site conditions, so we made sure all of our full sun plants were growing together and all of our shade plants were growing together. We removed all invasive or exotic plants and we changed it to native plants. And we also tried to preserve existing vegetation, especially trees, during disturbance activities. If you've got any questions, I encourage you to reach out to anybody, especially your extension agents in your county, anybody on the Sustainable Landscape Work Group. So if you've got any questions, feel free to holler at any of us. Thank you.